It gives me great pleasure to introduce this DunNETt talk featuring Dr Jelena Bakić, a scholar of Italian Renaissance literature and culture, specialising in paratextual and epistolary sources, privacy studies, and the history of emotions and knowledge. Her interdisciplinary research combines philological analysis, archival work, Italian paleography, and digital humanities, with particular attention to the recovery and digital representation of early modern women's and other marginalised voices. And that's what she's going to be talking to us today. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Jelena.
Thank you so much and good afternoon. And thank you very much for inviting me to present my research today. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to Julia Hart, whose professional and personal support I deeply appreciate. I'm also very grateful for the opportunity I was given to present my work at the Dorothy DunNETt Centenary Conference 3 years ago. I not only met wonderful and passionate readers of Dorothy DunNETt work, but I also took a part in a very productive non-academic and academic exchange on literature and history, an experience that, in my opinion, should become a common practice. In this way, academic knowledge moves beyond the boundaries of academia, and scholars are encouraged to reflect on why and how their research matters. After that event, I received the Dorothy DunNETt Centenary Award, which allowed me to carry out my research in Padua, in Biblioteca Civica. My article will be published in the Whispering Gallery, and today I will focus on a few authors whose book I consulted during that research stay in Padua. It was also a real pleasure to meet during our rehearsal Professor Lisa Hopkins and Nikki Cannon, and finally I would like to warmly thank the Dorothy DunNETt Society for this opportunity. So today I will present the online catalog called Parity in Renaissance, which you can see at the screen right now. In the first part of this lecture, I will present the online catalog. In the second part, I will focus on female voices of defense. And at the end, I would like to point out why such kind of representation might be important today. So the first part, parity in Renaissance. My colleagues very often by mistake read it party in Renaissance, and I actually take as a positive sign. So parity is much more than a catalog. It is a research platform and methodological tool for studying gendered knowledge production in early modern Europe. It focuses on Italian women authors, and I deliberately use the word authors because Renaissance women, like Dorothy DunNETt, were often not only writers, but also publishers, philosophers, pharmacists, musicians, lace makers, in one word, Renaissance women. So this platform documents their published work, and in particular, their paratexts, such as dedications. As you will see that in the early modern context, we usually refer to dedication as dedicatory epistle, then errata corrige in many cases, also addressee to the reader, and title pages, and so on. All this material is available in open access, together with the detailed information on each work, high-quality images, transcriptions, and curated online exhibitions. The platform is designed to make these authors and their text visible and accessible, and to open new ways of exploring their work. The acronym Parity stands for Paratext, Privacy, Renaissance, and Italy. The noun parity itself refers to the central theme of my current research interest: ideas of equality between women and men, therefore parity, as articulated by women authors not only in the main body of their text, but rather in paratextual elements such as dedicatory epistles and addresses to the reader. Here you can see the structure of the website. It is home that we saw at the beginning, where all these text can be clicked, then about, what it is about, and then the list of the authors, libraries and archives that I was using and where I consulted those books, the exhibition that we will see at the end, gallery, and the contact. So this website was originally the idea of my previous supervisor, Professor Mette Birkendal-Brun, at the Center for Privacy Studies at the University of Copenhagen. But it ultimately grew out of both a practical and personal need of my own. I wanted to make my presentation and future teaching easier by bringing together dispersed material in one accessible place without having to rely on endless PowerPoint slides. On the other hand, despite growing scholarly interest, there hasn't yet been a clear visualization of women's historical contribution to culture. Sadly, even in the 21st century, when many of these works have been digitalized, women's contribution often remain invisible. Recently, while I was a visiting professor at the University of Bologna, I used this website in my teaching. One of the most common reactions from students was surprise. Surprise at just how many women authors in the early modern period actively produced work and contributed to culture and knowledge. When suggesting the design of the website, I was inspired by Manzoni's well-known principle for literature: to be useful as its purpose, to be true as its subject, and interesting as it means. I wanted the site to be useful not only for researchers and professors, but also for the general public. The truth is reflected in my decision to leave any commentary or analysis and to use women's names exactly as they appear in the book they published. I also choose to list the first name before the surname. So all authors are listed by name and not by surname. As for being interesting, my hope is that by visually highlighting the beauty of the physical book and the library, the site will invite readers to explore and discover these works by themselves. I believe that is the part of the historian's task, especially since I also specialize in the history of emotions. It is my responsibility to share my love and passion for my research and sources and to find the right way to do so. So this is the site, how it looks now, showing how interdisciplinarity can become framework when literature, history, art, and digital humanities come together. The online database was designed by Jelena Bakić, a web and graphic designer with a background in eco-social design. I ideated the project and worked on it under the supervision of Professor Elizabeth Tauber, and the exhibition was provided by Daniela Zambaldi, as you will hear later. My research process usually involves consulting multiple editions of the books in libraries and archives, comparing paratext, scanning materials, and publishing them on this site. While digital, so here you can see the list of the libraries and that I have visited so far. And then it is possible also to click on it and it would open the website of that library. So every time, while also digital copies of the book are invaluable, holding the physical book, feeling its pages, its weight, its smell remains irreplaceable. I always promote archival research in a way. Every time I take a Renaissance book or manuscript in my hands, I feel a complex and a new emotion, a mix of responsibility and connection with the past. And these feelings inevitably shape how I interpret and represent these works. All books the main methodological approach is slow reading, reading primary sources, primary text, and rereading, and search for details within whole book and within the context and the text as a whole. So there are, let's say, 4 key terms that I would like to introduce briefly today in this first part of the lecture. And these are paratext, privacy, Renaissance, and the 4th is querelle de femme, which would be our topic today. So paratext, as you already know, was introduced by Dr Jelena back in 1987. And he defines all liminal devices that are physically attached to the book, such as title page, preface, dedicatory epistle, addressed to the reader, even errata corrige, and also the text outside the book, but connected with the main text. That can be the letter, the diary, but also in the context of early modern period, it can be the Inquisition trial if the author refers to her own book and to her own work. Here there is the explanation, and then there is the second key term, and that's the privacy. In paratextual elements, which Maria Antonietta Terzoli calls autobiographical public space, we often find a kind of double narrative. On one level, there is a personal self-authorizing voice rooted in private experience, and on the other, there are rhetorical rules, public norms that needed to be respected. Paratexts stand between the private and the public, and their epistolary character becomes one of their main patterns, especially in the 16th century, being a transitional period from the manuscript to the printed book. And the third key term is Renaissance. The Italian Renaissance context is especially important for this study, and the 16th century in particular, because it is Tommaso Campanella. It was Tommaso Campanella who called the 16th century feminine century, a term that already signals the significance of women's voices during that time. According to Virginia Cox, at least 150 single-authored printed works by Italian women were published between 1540 6059, showing that women were actively contributing to the cultural and literary life of the period. At its current stage, the Parity Online catalog presents around 40 paratextual elements related to women authorship in early modern Italy. So it is still only about halfway complete, as there should eventually be 63 paratexts, 63 women authors and many paratexts by women who published their work in Italian. All the women included belonged to the early modern period, and they wrote in Italian. I deliberately did not include women writing in Latin because those books had a different intended public and followed different conventions. And now we come to our 4th key concept, and that's querelle de femme. And I will show you the book of the most important of one of the most important authors in Italian context, female author, Lucrezia Marinella. So here you can see how the catalog is visualized, how these works are visualized. So there is the scan of the book, the title page, and then the dedicatory epistle. In this case, she dedicates her book to physician and philosopher Luciano Scarano. And in this dedication, she deliberately positions herself alongside established male scholars and within learned discourse of her time in order to strengthen her own intellectual authority. And then you see here, it is 9th of August 16, Lucrezia Marinella. So she wrote this book entitled The Nobility and Excellence of Women and Defects and Vices of Men, already published in 1601. And it is an extraordinary work that was also very famous during her lifetime. So this book belongs to the corpus of works that would become known as Querelle de Femmes, or debate over the intellectual and moral capacities of women. Over several centuries in all Europe, but especially in Italy and France, there developed a wide cultural debate about the nature, status, and worth of women, later known as Querelle de Femmes. This debate challenged long-standing and deeply entrenched ideas about women's role in society. Many contributions in form of treatises, philosophical discussion came from men, but women were also active participants. Sometimes their voice were fully articulated in the main text of the book, like this one, of Lucrezia Marinella. At other times, they appear only in dedicatory epistle or addressed to the reader, as we will see a bit later. Authors discussed the intellectual and moral equality of women, or even their superiority, as well as women's social status and roles. In the Italian context, the debate reached its peak around 1580, especially within the Venetian literary academies, and it continued into the 18th century. Within early modern polemics on the female sex, we can identify at least three main tendencies. First, some texts respond to specific attacks, which may also function as a rhetoric strategy, through which an author defends herself or female sex against a concrete insult or accusation. Second, some work defend women as a group, that's the female sex in general, often in the form of explicitly polemical or philosophical treatises. Third, other works, and also the courtier may be the most important, in different literary genres, focus on individual women whose lives are used to demonstrate either the equality or the superiority of women. In general, these treatises sought to challenge dominant ideas about women's inferiority. At the same time, they were shaped by widely shared rhetorical conventions and by specific social and cultural context. In this case, you can, like how to use also the website and for example, this book. Here you can read basic, but very basic information about Lucrezia Marinella. Here is the transcript of her dedicatory epistle. It can be read here, but also it is possible to download it or transcript all our text pictures. Since writing and literary production largely belonged to men, that was also the case within the Querelle de Femmes. So there is the project Men for Women, but the list here is not complete. But you can see the names of men who wrote, and also basic biographical data about men who wrote in defense of women during early modern period in Italian or in Italy. This is the one that I was working on, the Sicilian Girolamo Camerata, and he wrote also in defense of female honor. So here it finishes with 18th century, but this is only a small part of a number of those who participated in this debate, which according to some scholars is rhetorical exercise, in case of male writings. But in case of female writing, there is one special pattern that I will also point out during this lecture, that women usually refer to their own sex, to their gender, and to their own private experience. And that makes them different from the male authored works in the same context. So apart from Lucrezia Marinella, whose work you have seen now, and this is only one book, and there are many others that should be added in this catalog, there is the name of Moderata Fonte, it is the pseudonym, and it is one of maybe most interesting book, but here it is not, I still did not uploaded the work on her, the most famous book published after her death, and that is Merito delle Donne, and which is translated in English like Women's Worth. Moderata Fonte, also here you have her name, or this is the pseudonym she was using. Her real name is Modesta Pozzo de Zorzi. She was born in Venice in 1555 and died in 1592. And also in exhibition, you can later see this is her book represented as dedicated by her daughter, Cecilia de Zorzi. So I invite you to see also this representation, which is very interesting. But Moderata Fonte used this pseudonym in order to express also what was highly valued in early modern intellectual culture, and that's the moderate source, moderate fountain of knowledge. So she was interested in knowledge, but not without exaggeration, let's say. And she wrote that very interesting book, The Worth of Women, that is represented in exhibition. And I will not, or I can just show you briefly.
Sono Cecilia di Zorzi e do alla stampa il libro scritto da mia madre, Moderata Fonte, Il merito delle donne, ove chiaramente si scopre quanto siano elle degne et più perfette degli uomini.
This is this is the short exhibition, but this is the title page of the book Il merito delle donne, The Worth of Women, a dialogue in the form of conversation among 7 women. And these 7 women represent 7 socially accepted roles for women. There is an old widow, her daughter, young widow, 2 married women, and a young bride, and Dimessa, a young girl who should marry soon. And they are gathered in an idyllic garden to discuss the social and political norms that shaped women's life. This is also very interesting from the point of view of the paratextual analysis, because the book is dedicated by her daughter 8 years after her mother's death. And there are also 2 poems by her son. And in that dedicatory text, also daughter takes the words by her mother, how these things are important and how much is important for women to publish her work. Another woman that I will also briefly represent, because they all published all books dedicated to defense of female rights, we can also say. And another one is Arcangela Tarabotti, who is the Benedictine nun, and about whom I wrote an article that will be published in the Spring Gallery. And here you can see the title page of her book entitled La semplicità ingannata, which means innocence betrayed. But we know that this book was originally entitled Paternal Tyranny. And that's such a powerful title that also it sounds powerful also today. And we can imagine how it sounded in the 17th century. Arcangela Tarabotti, as you can see, was born in 1604 and died in 1652 in Venice. And in Italian context, we mainly speak about, but not exclusively about Veneto, about Venice, about Padua in the early modern period. And here you can also read her pseudonym. So we saw it also in Moderata Fonte, but also here. And this is Jelena Barattotti, which is a very powerful pseudonym that plays with her Tarabotti, her surname, but also with the name Galera, which is prison in Italian, and Bara, which is coffin, and she refers to her enforced stay in the convent in Venice at the time. She spent almost all her life in the convent Sant'Anna in Venice. So how we know that also the title of this book was not meant to be like this, we know again from the paratext, from the dedicatory, from the addressee to the reader of her first book, where the publisher wrote, and I will just read it to you, although this is only to provide you one overview how women used these different strategies to appear in print, to publish their work, and to react against social and gender norms. And that printer, while he was introducing her first book, he said, expect shortly other composition from this same most celebrated pen, perhaps more piquant for being much more suited to the taste of the century. Paternal Tyranny, I hope, will be the first. And then, of course, she couldn't write the book under that title, and the book was published after her death, and it immediately finished at the Index of Prohibited Books. So here also I would like to show you what you can see in this catalog. It is the title, the name, and then you can also see that it was published in Leiden. And her dedicatory epistle is very special and very interesting from the point of view of female contribution to Querelle de Femme, because this is very personal and very much connected with the public comments of the rules of family and the rules of society. And she reacts, and she says in this dedicatory epistle very explicitly that, and I will quote, "If I accomplish nothing else of good, at least may I awaken a remorse of the consciousness of wicked men." So she really tried with this book and with all her work to react against injustices toward women, in particular toward women who were sent to the convent without their own will. So these are examples how you can find the authors, find basic information, read paratext. If it is still in Italian, these parts should be also translated, and a lot of them are translated. There is that other voice in early modern Europe, and this work is translated as Paternal Tyranny, so it can be read also in English. And now I would like to, after these three authors, Lucrezia Marinella, Arcangela Tarabotti, and Moderata Fonte, about whom I couldn't speak very much into detail, I would like to show you one example that I worked on during my research stay in Padua, and that's her name is Camilla Herculiana, and she was born in Padua and she lived in Padua. And here you can see her book, Lettere di Filosofia Naturale. She was born in 1584. She wrote, this is her only work. It was published in Krakow in 1584, as I said, written in Italian. And as you can see already from the title, she wrote about themes not so typical for women. She wrote about the theory of natural origins of the great deluge, the natural disposition of man, the natural formation of the rainbow. Letters of Natural Philosophy by Camilla Herculiana, Speciala. Speciala alle 3 stelle. So she was the pharmacist at 3 stars. So the usual English translation of the word speciala is apothecary. So she was the female apothecary at the pharmacy called 3 stelle. But the meaning of this noun is broader, and it refers to spicer apothecaries, indicating those who made and sold botanical and pharmaceutical remedies, which often included spices. It might be a limited edition of the book, as only 5 examples of this book can be traced today. It is between 1580, so here you can see how her name appeared on 25th February 1584. And this is the paratext that we will also hear today, a lettori, to readers. The complete work of Camilla Herculiana includes dedicatory epistle, or first the dedicatory poem to students of philosophy, then dedicatory epistle alla Serenissima Regina Anna, to the Queen of Poland, Queen Anna of Poland, dated 25th February 1584, and 2 pages, or 1 page and a half of the text to the reader, which functions as a dedicatory epistle and as a kind of preface. In addition, there is also the Latin encomiastic poem written by Andreas Glogowicz, who studied philosophy in Padova, and there are 4 letters, Lettere di Filosofia Naturale. 3 of them are signed by Herculiana herself. For today's lecture, we are focusing a bit more into detail on the address to the reader by Camilla Herculiana. So here, as you have already seen, this is the part exhibition, and I selected for now only 3 female authors. And the idea was not only to visualize their works, but also to give the voice to these authors. So here you can see, you can hear the voice by Camilla Herculiana, and I hope you can follow it because it should be the English translation in chat that you have received. So you can read the English translation and follow the representation of her work.
Mi chiamo Camilla Erculiana. Sono speciala alle 3 Stelle di Padova. Nel 1584 ho pubblicato un libro, Lettere di filosofia naturale. A lettori. Parrà senza dubbio maraviglia ad alcuno ch'io, donna, mi sia posta a scrivere e dare alla stampa cose che non s'appartengono, secondo l'uso dei nostri tempi, a donna. Ma se vorranno con buon giudizio e senza affezione alcuna considerar la mutazione dei tempi e degli stati e degli uomini e con qual materia sian creati, troverà che non è la donna priva di quelle provvidenze e virtù che sì sian gli uomini. È vero che si potranno molto meravigliar ch'io, senza veder libri, m'abbia apposta a dar fuori queste 4 mal composte righe, principiando a mezzo del soggetto, cosa in vera sconvenevole, quand'io non avessi animo, e anco scritto il principio e il rimanente, il tutto però sotto nome di lettere, le quali, piacendo alla maestà di Dio, voglio, quando sarà tempo, mandare in luce. Ne avrei poste ora queste alla stampa, s'io non mi avesse fidata di farle vedere a persona, che poi è ita altrove, come odo, a stamparle sotto suo nome, cosa che a me è molto spiaciuta, perciò ch'io non potrei dar fuori il rimanente, ma aurei perso tutte le mie fatiche. Né di queste fatiche farei io molta stima, se non mi si togliesse l'occasione de far conoscere il buon animo delle donne dei nostri tempi, cosa in vero da me molto desiderata. E a fine che si conoschi, come ancor noi sappiamo che cosa sia anima, voglio, piacendo a Dio, nell'altre mie, dirvi che cosa, e dove, e quando, e in qual virtù si generi l'anima nostra. Parrà senza dubbio difficile il provar questo ad alcuni, ma agli intelligenti non parerà cosa fuori della verità. E questo si darà in luce poco da poi queste, secondo che mi parrà, che queste poche righe siano tenute e accettate con quel buon animo che io le do in luce ora a voi. E insieme darò con altre bellissime dichiarazioni d'autori, non molto facili ad intendersi. Né il far questo mi dà noia, ancor ch'io abbia il travaglio d'allevar figliuoli, il peso del governo della casa e l'obbedienza del marito e la mia complessione non troppo sana. Quanto mi dà noia il conoscere che da molti velati da spirito maligno saranno queste mie fatiche o scritti biasimate, e tanto più saranno tenute vane e di poca stima per essere tenute tali le donne dei nostri tempi. Ma con tutto ciò non voglio restar d'affaticarmi per recuperare in parte l'onor delle spensierate, e sarò forse una causa e svegliamento agli intelletti loro. E sono sicura che s'attendessero a questo, non avriano ardire i cavalieri esterni di venire in questa inclita città di Padova e volere con spada e lanza provare e tassar noi d'imperfezione. Oltre che sono sicura che molti savi e intelligenti lettori di quest'opera non si faranno beffe dell'invenzione di quella e ammireranno la volontà mia, insieme con il desiderio dei miei pensieri. Vivete felici.
The gendered language is clear. I hope that you had the possibility to read it in English. It highlights her belonging to her female sex. What is particularly interesting here is the rhetorical use of the phrase according to the custom of our time, in parentheses. This emphasized that it was in line with the contemporary practice, and it may also suggest that it was different in the past, and perhaps it can be different in the future. In the final part of this dedicatory, of this address to the reader, the shift from private to public life becomes evident, as does the function of the paratext as metaphorical bridge between private life and the published word. And I will read it again in English. Camilla Herculiana writes, "Although I toil at raising children under the weight of overseeing the house and the duty of obedience to my husband, and in spite of my none too healthy complexions, these things do not bother me as much as it bothers me to know that many people shrouded by a malicious spirit will condemn my labors or writings, and further they will consider them to be vain and of little value, as the women of our times are considered to be." The good and devoted mother, the obedient housewife, a woman of weak health and modesty, stands in contrast to the image of women who writes, makes decisions, and publishes. Traditionally excluded from public power, she needed to defend her act of publishing the book. And I will just now to conclude, I would like to say why this kind of visualization of past might be important today. Here is part gallery, where I put some pictures from the archives and from the libraries. It is just, they are just there randomly. But there is the quote for George Eliot, and I use it also as a motto of my work, and I would read it for you. "For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs." It is because visualization allows us to make invisible contributions visible, to bring forgotten voices back into view, and to show that the past was full of people actively producing knowledge and culture. The women represented in this catalogue rest in unvisited tombs. I'm sure many of you have never heard of them, but it's not just you. Women's voices from the past, whether in the context of Querelle de Femme or not, are extremely important for us today. The Parity Project makes it clear that many women actually published their work and they dared to speak in public about topics considered inappropriate, challenging the gender norms and systems of their time. For women who already wrote from the social margins, the marginal space of the book represented a strategic way to express ideas that could not be included in the main text or expressed in the other forms. It offered more freedom for innovation and personal commentary than the primary text would allow. In this way, the paratext becomes a tool to challenge traditional gender norms and to articulate the ideas of defense. It is true that the strategic function of the early modern paratext, especially dedicatory epistle and addressed to the reader, was also typical of male authors, who use it to negotiate authorship and assert authority. But there is an important difference in female authored works. Women use this space as rare opportunities to express ideas about their private lives and gendered experience, and sometimes to reveal private practices of their knowledge production. By doing this, we do not only bring authors, both men and women, back into history, but these cases can help us trace the ideas of inequality and arguments validated by tradition even today. And let me finish again with Camilla's words that you have already heard, and I quote, "It will seem without doubt incredible to some that I, women, have set myself to writing and printing ideas that according to the customs of our time are not suitable for women. But if you desire with good judgment and without prejudice to consider the changing of the times and the states and of men, and with what matter they were created, you will find that women do not lack the foresight and virtues that men have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. If you'd like to stop screen sharing, and then everyone can see everyone else. And I'm going to invite questions in a minute when we can see people. So if anyone wants to ask a question, if you switch off your camera, then you can raise your real hand, or you can raise a virtual hand at the bottom of the screen under React. We can still, okay. But I'm going to, yeah, got it. But I'm going to take chair's privilege and ask the first question, which is about size, because size obviously has consequences for affordability. Would I be able to find out from the catalogue whether a book's quarto or folio or duodecimo or whatever it might be?
So when you would download it?
Yeah, I could see.
Yeah,
I could see on the screen that not all the little thumbnail images were the same size. I didn't know if that represented actual physical size.
No, it is not, and that thank you very much for that question. So I think that the next step would be also to describe the size, the materiality of the book. That should also stay somewhere. That what are the size of the book? And yes, no, it does not represent. Like the main idea was to make it as simple as possible and easy to navigate. So now it was the first step, and from now on, I will just add the other important data about the work.
And surviving copies, do we know anything about how many copies of each survive?
Yes, for example, for Camilla, we know that only 5 copies exist of her book, of this one that I presented. In some cases, there are so many copies of the books. So then I still don't know how to continue when I represent them. But when we have a small number of books, it is very at this historical moment, it's quite easy also to compare them because, for example, this Camilla's book is already digitalized in Poland. So there is 1 copy in Poland, there is 1 at Harvard University, 2 in Padova, and 1 in Rome, I think. So we know for that, like this is the limited edition, and but also, for example, for the copies of the book by Lucrezia Marinella, I found them in almost all libraries in Italy so in those cases we have like so many copies of the book.
Yeah, so I saw St. Catherine of Siena and St. Catherine of Genoa in there too, so presumably a lot. Julia, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Could I ask, do we know how many of these women were married, how many were nuns, and how many were formally educated? One of them, I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, but one of them commented on not being able to study, or implied that she had not been able to study, and that people might be surprised that she had read books and was able to write a book herself. I'm just wondering, just to recap, how many were in convents, how many were married, how they were educated, and how they came to be literate and knowledgeable?
We usually have the data, and we know in case of these 4 women that I represented today, we know that Camilla was the eldest of her brothers, and usually it was common that the eldest child is educated to help in family, like in family business. So that's also something that we can think about. And we also know that her 2 husbands were pharmacists, so she could work with them. And we also know that her brother was a lawyer, because when her book was when she was questioned by Inquisition, we know that she was defended by Menocchio, who was collaborating with her brother. So these things are reconstructed mainly by researcher Eleonora Carinci, who worked on her. So these things we know, like about Camilla Erculiana. So we can the reconstruction exists, and it is connected with her family and with her 2 marriages later. And also she writes, and that's also part of rhetorical strategy, that she, without seeing the books, she managed to publish this work. And that's also common rhetorical strategy because it goes in line with the topos of modesty, typical for the dedicatory genre. And she needed to say something, but in fact, she had possibility also to discuss, possibly because that pharmacy where she worked, La Spezzeria, she worked very close to the University of Padua. And then the book was sent also to Poland to be published, and it is connected with the fact that she might have a connection with the student from Poland who would publish the book there, help in publishing book there in order to escape the Inquisitional trial, which did not happen because the book finished there. For Arcangela Tarabotti, she really speaks in all her books about her education and how she was reading her books in the convent, and she also refers to books that she was reading. So it is more or less that she was we know the practice of her knowledge production from her letters and from her books, and we know that she exchanged so many letters. That is also that usually we would imagine the convent, the place where women live in a privacy, like in a private environment. But when we see how many letters she exchanged with many influential men and women in Venice and abroad, it is really significant amount. So that's for her. For Moderata Fonte, we know that she was married and that she also her children wrote these dedicatory epistles, and she wrote also other works. And so in these cases, we have like 2 married women and 1 nun. Lucrezia Marinella, she was the daughter of the physician. He was also, or he was just interested in natural philosophy. So she was she lived, and she was of a noble origin. So it is her education is connected with her home and with her family. So that is mainly for these authors. For the others, we know that like there are in this catalog there will be other nuns and also other women. There is, for example, Maddalena Campiglia and the other who were not married, some of them were widows. So usually we know what was the position and the situation of these women.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah, you're muted. Classic Zoom moment.
You mentioned the Inquisition a number of times. Were there books in front of the Inquisition because every book was, or because they were women, or because of the content that was known?
That's very important because in case of Camilla Erculiana, it is because of the content. And that is something that it is the proof that her ideas were seen as important and as something that it should be questioned. And at the Inquisition, that's also very interesting in Camilla's case. And there is all her, like the book is translated in English, and also the recording from the Inquisition trial are translated in the letter on natural philosophy in 2021. And she defended herself as a natural philosopher, because usually women would defend themselves. I, as a woman, I could not say important things, because I belong to the weak sex, and so my thoughts are not so important as those by men. But she never mentioned that in that source that we have, that it is like, and in the source it was also common to write like words in a direct speech. So, but she will says, I speak philosophically, and I think that as somebody who thinks in a philosophical way.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I was struck at the beginning of your talk by your comment about the emotions and sensations about holding the physical antiquity of the book in your hand. And long ago in my college days, I had that pleasure in the Library of the History of the City of Paris with some stuff, and would love to hear you speak more about that if you cared to.
Of course, that's my... There is that historian from Italy, Alessandro Barbero, who said that the most emotional moments in his life are visits to the archives. And I really, I really agree, because that's something that it happened to me, that I started doing archival research only during my PhD, not before. And my PhD, I did the first 6 months in Canterbury. So I went to the British Library, and I worked on authors from early modern Dubrovnik in Croatia. And then I was there, and I just asked for that book that I was working on. And the librarian told me, oh, it seems this is the only copy in the world. And I just felt my work, I really felt like, oh my God. So if you give that to me, but she was wrong. It was not. There were many others. So later but for me, that was just a moment that I was thinking, if that book was not still represented, and if I'm the one who needs to do that, that is such a huge responsibility. And for me, that is the main emotion that I feel. And now when I work on these works, the problem is that academia is very fast now. And if we want to do fast in the sense that we need to produce outputs regularly, but for like the good research, we need time. So every time I go to the library, I would just read the book. I would take it, like Camilla's book, and I would just feel it and read it. Because sometimes people just come and take photos, and then they analyze those photos later. But in representation, and I think we really need that experience if we have that privilege of consulting the original book. And somehow those things I never forget. I can forget, like if I read something, but if I take the book, like the material book written by the author, like that it is written 500 years ago, and now I'm including also manuscripts, which is very like sometimes very difficult to transcribe and not to make mistake and so on. But I think that that material contact and materiality of the work is very important when thinking and representing the book. Thank you for your question.